Welcome to Globig. I'm your host, Anka Corbin, the CEO of Globig, your online global expansion headquarters. We help companies go global faster, easier, more affordably, and more effectively with much less risk. My guest today is Carlin Dornbusch. He's the CEO of American Cybersecurity Management. So welcome, Carlin. Today we're going to talk about how to prepare for GDPR. And we're going to provide you high-level tips. It's an introduction to an extensive and comprehensive training course that we're launching to help SMEs prepare for GDPR. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Anka.
So tell us a little bit about American Cybersecurity Management, as well as your background and what makes you the expert in this space.
Sure, you bet. When we started American Cybersecurity Management, we founded it really on the principles around data protection and really reducing the risk for enterprises and smaller businesses around data. So we have privacy practice as well as security practice. And that's been our focus now. And my history has been certainly on the technology side of things and the business side, and helping companies take advantage of security as not only just a defensive mechanism, but also as a competitive advantage and differentiation in the market. So helping people take new products to market, new approaches to market, and trying to be on kind of the leading edge of business change.
So our topic is GDPR, and before we start down that path, a lot of companies are maybe not really familiar with what GDPR is, even though I know we should all be familiar with that.
Right.
And so tell us what it is.
Yeah, GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and that came from the European Union. And they are trying to strengthen privacy rules around EU citizen information.
So why is GDPR important, especially to an American company? So what does it matter to us?
Right. This regulation, and it really is a regulation, versus, say, other directives that have come from the EU. So this is highly enforceable, is the big thing. And it's broad in its scope. So this is about that citizen data. So any European citizen data now comes under this regulation, and anybody gathering, managing, and processing that information has to comply.
So we're kind of talking everyone here. So who does it apply to?
Right. It's a global economy, right? So it would appear that almost every company it will be applicable to.
What's the time frame? What are we looking at when all of this is kind of coming to be?
Right. So early 2016 is when the EU actually announced this with its detailed definitions. And now in 2018, so I think it's May 28th, is when the EU then will begin assessing companies and handing out penalties.
All right. So that's really the risk, right? So
right.
If you don't comply...
And the risk can be high. So, and you can see this on their website in that they've stated non-compliance can be up to 4% of your global revenue or 20 million euros, whichever is greater. So it's a very hefty fine, and there's some gradients to that depending on kind of how far along you are in your implementation. But it is it's significant to most companies.
So we're all supposed to be fairly ready, and I can tell you that that's not the case for a lot of companies. What does readiness actually look like?
Right. I think what companies, there's several things that companies need to do to go through the process. And while this is seen as a requirement, there's it's fairly broad in what you have to implement. So there's a set of details out there, and people will be held accountable by the EU. They will come to see your paperwork and proof, and you will have to show them that you have changed your policies and your procedures are compliant. You know where your data is, and you've mapped all that out correctly.
So they're actually going to come and check that you are complying with this. So
Right.
there's things that you're going to have to show them. They're going to dig through. However, it's fascinating. What are the key things that companies need to do to be ready? Like, what do they have to prepare for to be compliant for GDPR?
Right, and that's a really good question. And so the first thing is businesses really need to make it a priority, and they need to realize that this is that it's very strategic and it should be integral to their business. And privacy or implementing GDPR is not just a project. So it has a long-term efforts, and it reaches across your entire business. So the first thing they need to do is establish kind of a leader around privacy if they haven't already. The GDPR calls that the data protection officer in the company. You can outsource that if you want, but you at least need to have somebody with that responsibility. From there, they're able to put the team together and the processes and so forth, and to start to go through an assessment and then an implementation and then the maintainability. Well, some of the things that happen in the early stages, you would start to create a data inventory, and that a lot of companies struggle here just to know, well, where is all my data? So usually the larger the company, the more difficult that task can be. But once you have the inventory, then you can start moving into kind of a mapping exercise, which is really kind of diagramming the flow of information throughout your system. In a global economy, also with these composite applications that are out there, data is kind of everywhere, and so it's important to know where all your data is and how it flows through your enterprise, because you need to start to document that and be able to describe what the interactions are and how really privacy applies at those layers. From there, it gets into risk analysis. An assessment and management to figure out, well, so what are the priorities for us? And so your mileage will vary there depending on how complex your business is. And then from there, it's about managing that risk. And so your risk assessment will help you define your prioritized tasks around completing the really rolling out the rest of the privacy implementation through all your systems. And so you'll, and what that rollout looks like, it could be simply, changing some contracts. It could be working on your own internal policies and some of your public policies, but there's usually some technology change as well. Because of the some of the requirements, it does require some technology implementation in most cases.
And it's not just your business, right? It's like anyone that works with you. So all your third-party vendors. So if you're an application and you have all sorts of different, apps that have been kind of aggregated to create and do your business, they're all part of this exercise, right? It's not just what you're responsible for.
That's right. And that is one of the big changes in why the EU put GDPR in place. Traditionally, it had been just a single layer of responsibility, and now that responsibility goes all the way down to actually where your data is stored. So if you're using third parties to store your data or process data, it is now incumbent upon you to ensure that they have actually met all these requirements as well. So it's not as simple as just relying on a provider that you might have who may be compliant, but you now actually have to be compliant as well.
And you need to check with all of your different service providers. So open source systems might be fairly complex because there's probably no one really there.
Right. And so it's not just all the storage, but it's exactly that. Who else makes up your ecosystem, and so that's kind of the mapping that the business owners need to go through, so that they really understand who has access into what type of data, so that they can manage that all correctly.
Yeah. I've been trying to read up on this because, again, I'm just learning, and sometimes I get a sense that there's a lot of legal requirements, but then on other times I get a sense that there are a lot of technical requirements. is this a legal challenge or is this a technical challenge with GDPR?
That's a great question. I think the lawyers would typically say it's a legal challenge first. We've got to work through the legal issues, and then the larger product companies would say, oh no, we've got technology, just run it on our technology and you'll be fine. And in our experience has been it's really the middle. This is a situation where a certain regulation is so broad in nature, it's starting to bring together the kind of the legal or the governance side of your business as well as the technology side of your business. So what many people are finding is that they actually need additional technology to implement all the controls that are needed to meet these requirements. Right. But that doesn't solve all the problems. It solves a lot of them. And it also gives you good sustainability in your business to ensure that you remain that way. But there's also, contracts with your suppliers, contracts with your partners, contracts with your user base that all need to be addressed. You have certain notifications that have to be taken into consideration. So usually there's some amount of legal assistance required for that. So it is really, I think, important to look at this very holistically and not through just one of the two lenses that I think are being presented today. Because I think with that holistic view, you will come to a balanced solution and also one that probably becomes a lot more affordable to sustain long term.
Well, you just mentioned the affordable word. So what does this sort of a process, because this is somewhat a new expense, right? This is a new bucket that needs to be considered by companies.
Right.
Those are always challenging to fit in. What will this look like for a company?
Hopefully everybody budgeted for this in 2016. But in those cases, when they haven't, right, it's really starting to look at this and try to take a bit of a stepwise approach and be practical with what you're doing, and to always show progress. That's another thing. When the EU comes to a business, they're really going to want to know, well, do you know what GDPR is? Have you taken these steps? And you're going to want to kind of testify, if you will, through your documentation, just like as if you were having an audit. You prefer just to have, send all the documentation to the auditor rather than have to walk them around your office and show them what's going on. So I think there's several things that folks can do to put their documentation in order. There's a few system changes they can make, but really, once they have assigned a resource and they start to go through that risk analysis, then I think it really becomes much clearer to the businesses as to what they need to do, and they can then start to right size their investment in what they need to do.
Very interesting. So, this is really the introduction to a training course that we're working on, which is going to be very comprehensive, and it will help companies go through these processes and give them somewhat of a framework, if you will, for how to approach this. But in the meantime, how can companies learn more? What's the way that an SME especially, right? The bigger companies, they're going to hire teams of people. They're going to bring in both technical support and legal support, and they're going to hire DPOs, which frankly is one of the hottest job options out there right now. Those are going to be hard to get because everyone's fighting for those specific experts because it takes so many years of expertise to be able to help with that. How does a smaller company approach this from a knowledge gathering and then bringing in some people that might be able to help them?
Right, and certainly the mileage varies based on the complexity of your business, and so the larger the business, the more distributed it is, the more complex solutions they have, the longer this will take, the more resourcing it would take. But the SMEs have a real advantage, as I see it, because as they start to grow and expand in other countries and take on other users, that would certainly be EU citizens, they have a real opportunity to, it's called privacy by design, and they have an opportunity to really bake into their business a lot of these privacy concepts that are discussed and really are trying to be measured in the GDPR. So they kind of have an advantage because of their size, and so that's a really good thing. And I think if they can marry that with some expertise, then they can do small investments that are incremental over time to help them become stronger around privacy, which as they then become larger and kind of get on the radar of the EU, then it becomes a lot easier for them to testify and say that, well, they've been doing these things, and they've actually probably been doing it longer than some of these larger companies. So I think it's a real advantage for them.
I think that one of the things, and I think this is a false assumption, is that this is this onerous new thing that's kind of being pushed on companies. But in fact, it's actually it's like privacy and being respectful to customers is probably a really great business practice that we're all now just kind of being guided into, and that'll make us all better companies in the long run, right? I kind of look at this as, this isn't just the EU either. I know the GDPR is the EU, but right. I know that Asia, and especially like Australia and in Canada and other countries, they're kind of using this as a template, if you will, right? So it's going to impact us, and we might as well all do a good job with this.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's in the news all the time, yeah. Right? There's been a breach here and a breach there, and millions of records, thousands of records, and a data breach is a breach of privacy.
Right.
And so, and that's really where you start to see kind of the security side meeting the legal side of things, and so it is a really important thing, and it becomes very personal, right? Because we all have our data in some system somewhere, and we hope that those systems and owners of those systems are being respectful with our information, or using it for the purpose that we have opted into and have subscribed to. But the U.S. culture really hasn't been that way, and so now you've got this kind of influence that's coming into the U.S. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out over the next few years.
One of the things that I really like about your company is that it's really set up to help SMEs, and it's also set up to be flexible, and something that I hadn't really heard of but that you guys offer is that fractional DPO, and the opportunity for companies really such as us where we have the right intentions, but we may not have the expertise on the team to come in at the right level at an affordable way of getting this expertise. And so tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do with that.
We can help from a GDPR assessment through implementation, but also there's the sustainability afterwards. And so our effort is around the education, driving the awareness through the culture, helping people really start to blend their traditional maybe product business side with that compliance side. There's a lot of techniques that we work on with clients. And we try to bring that to them in such a way that it becomes very sustainable for them, so that we're not in the account all the time. We want to, for lack of a better term, teach them how to fish, and let them do it themselves. So we have a culture of kind of a help you do it model. It's a bit immersive up front, but then it creates that sustainability, and then we can bring in our fractional services to kind of help sustain that over time. We're not lawyers by any means, but we work with a lot of law firms and know how to make the legal work a lot more scalable for the businesses, and help the businesses understand when they really ought to be reaching out for technology solutions, legal solutions, and of that nature.
Yeah. What we'll do is along with this video, we'll put resources, because you have a bunch of really awesome resources that we'll want to share. And then we obviously want to invite you to join us for kind of the more extensive training, which we're going to be launching in the next few weeks from here, so that you can, if you have the resources, do it yourself, or you can just be really savvy and understand where you need help and where you don't need help. So Carlin, I want to thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your expertise, and look forward to the kind of larger, expansive training that we're putting together. So,
Great. Well, thank you, Anka. Appreciate it.
So Carlin, we have a number of resources that we're going to be sharing, and we obviously want to invite all of our listeners today to take a look at the more extensive training. There you're really going to go into depth and understand what you can do yourself, and maybe you can do all of this yourself, or where you're going to need some additional resources. So make sure that you go to globig.co for the comprehensive training session that we've put together on GDPR and what you need to do as a company to be compliant. So this is Anka Corbin. Thank you so much for joining us today. Go to globig.co for your training resources on GDPR, and we look forward to having you go global and go big with us.